Okay. Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you all for being here today, this afternoon. My name is Peter Fitz. I am a adjunct faculty member at Howard University School of Social Work. In addition to that, I'm also a clinician in private practice here in Maryland. My focus and specialization is on individuals, families, adults, and adolescents who present with a multitude of emotional issues. And I am excited to talk about mindfulness and mental health as our times that we are living in right now are very, very challenging with the multitude of stimulation we receive politically, socially, economically, financially that's going on around us every day. This topic is important in another sense that we don't oftentimes have the time or the resources to take care of our mental health. So, I want this to be a discussion that is helpful and informative for you. So, let me get started here with the definition, if you will, of what mental health is. And so we go to our first slide. Um, okay, the intersection uh, between mental health and mindfulness. And so, starting off with mental health, we hear this term a lot. And what does it mean? And so, mental health is a state of mind. It's a state of mental well-being that allows us to kind of deal with that as a result of how we handle our daily lives, our stressors, our standing in the community, our relationships with our families, how we adjust to decision making, and it's a basic right, and it is important to how we evolve as people. Next slide. Mental health is a state where one is consistently aware that they are in harmony, that they are aware of themselves and connected with their mind, body, and spirit. Mental health is not a static state of being, but often has varying degrees of being. So, if I asked you now, how would you describe your mental health? We will get a varying response to how we define our state of being, either happy, sad, depressed, angry, etc. And that state will change from time to time. Now, mental health prior to today's discussion has been something we strive for, but we really don't know how we get there. We sometimes our mental health is based on how we're doing financially. Sometimes our mental health is based on how we feel physically. Sometimes our mental health is based on how others around us are doing. So then we get into, well, what drives our mental health? What drives to how we feel a certain way? And we get into now what's called mindfulness. Next slide. So, understand the impacts of mindfulness on mental health. What comes first, mental health concerns or lack of mindfulness? Our mental health and well being is contingent upon our ability to have sustainable mindfulness practices. The practices of mindfulness helps us develop our mental health. Oftentimes, we do not understand how we get to a state of mental health, and that's why we're going to talk. I want to talk more about mindfulness. Next slide. So, as we talk about mindfulness and mental health, there are some barriers. There are some barriers to our mental health, and we all have knowledge of the traditional mental health diagnoses or states of mind or illness that get in the way of our healthiness. That being major depressive disorders, bipolar disorders, having ADHD, or better known as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADD, attention deficit disorder. We see this more often in kids. It's known as a child disorder. However, more and more adults are being diagnosed with ADHD and ADD. Also, in the same car with ADHD is anxiety. We hear about schizophrenia, Alzheimer's, and dementia. Now, these are some barriers that we know affect how we see our mental health as a total being. Next slide. But there are some inorganic things that happen to us that also affect our mental health. Primary and secondary trauma. Have we seen violence? Are we a victim of violence? Have we been a victim of domestic violence? Have we seen domestic violence? Environmental stressors such as oppressed neighborhoods, um, crime in our neighborhood, etc. Substance abuse. Um, are you adult child or alcoholic, or do you have relatives that are engaged in substance abuse? Are you in recovery? Of course, depression. These are things that happen outside of our physical being. Sexual assault and feeling isolated. Sometimes we're isolated from family members. We live in a different state. Our children are away from us. We don't have friends. So these are things that also affect our mental health that we need to pay attention to. Um, Community, next slide. Community disparities, food deserts, gun violence, homelessness, financial stress, and underemployment. These are things that affect our psyche and how we do and see things on a daily basis. So we have what's called organic illness, the things that we can't control because biologically we're we're uh, we're exposed to it biologically through genetics, and then we have the inorganic things that happen outside of us physically that cause barriers to mental health. So there's two sides: the organic side and the inorganic side. Okay, next slide. Okay, so let's get into mindfulness. Mindfulness started years ago, ancient Buddhist times, and it's how we have a pursued quality of mind and the process that's cultivated to bring about greater enjoyment and engagement in life, and to increase our equanimity and compassion for oneself and others in the midst of life's ups and downs. So now, mindfulness, unlike mental health, mindfulness is a process. It's something that we're learning more about how to engage, how to utilize, and how to develop to create a better sense of mental health. Next slide. So, mindfulness has three components. One component of this is executive functioning, self awareness, and self management. Okay. Now, executive functioning is how we make things happen. Okay. Executive functioning is a central brain process that helps us take our thoughts and intentions and put them into action. They help us develop skills necessary for us to succeed in everyday life. So, how do we plan to make things happen? For example, it might require us to make a write down task. We make a schedule. Uh, how do we um, plan for the next day? How do we reflect on what happened the previous day? How do we clean our house? An example of that, of poor executive functioning, would be what we see in hoarding behavior. Next slide. Oh, yeah, okay, oh, no, you're fine. You're fine. It's fine. I'm sorry. So we see this a lot of times in hoarding. Uh, Hoarding is oftentimes attached to a diagnosis of major depression, for example, or anxiety. Well, people who may be diagnosed with depression or anxiety have difficulty in organizing their executive functioning to clean the house or manage the house. And so therefore, executive functioning planning is key and crucial. Next slide. Okay, one more slide. I'm sorry. Okay. The next is self-awareness. Self-awareness is how we pay attention to our daily functioning on purpose. We go out of our way to be aware of what we're doing and how we do it on a slow basis. So I call this our proactive approach. How do we proactively go about what we need to do for ourselves? This is also attached to a new dialogue in psychology we call positive psychology, being purposeful. So self awareness is really being proactive versus reactive. A lot of times, things will come towards us, an event will happen around us, and we react to it. And when we react to it, that raises our anxiety, it raises our stress level, and we don't feel like we're in control of our life. So being self-aware and looking forward to the next day or looking forward to our day and our daily challenges is important. It's an approach to enjoying life fully by being more present and more compassionate with ourselves and others. It encompasses a unique set of foundational attitudes about living. Next slide. Okay, so we talk about self-management, and again, it's the capacity to consciously direct our thoughts and actions so we can experience more of what we want in our lives. Self-awareness plus self-management equals mindfulness. Now, I mentioned the power of positive psychology. And positive psychology has 5 elements in it that I just want to talk about really quickly. And you've heard this term about people being so positive. People have such a great attitude to life. And that's key because positive psychology talks about having positive emotions, right? Having good thoughts about the day, having good thoughts about our life, even in troubled times. And we have positive engagement, being fulfilled in our activities, doing activities that make us feel good. The third principle of this is meaning and purpose. What is our sense of purpose to what we do? Why do we do what we do? And what's the purpose for that? Being purposeful. The fourth principle in this is a sense of accomplishment, emphasizing the value of focusing on the progress and process of our actions. So, the process of our action, back to mindfulness, is a process, emphasizing the value and enjoying that value. And the fifth principle of positive psychology and positive thinking and self awareness is having positive relationships, or better, most commonly known as not being around toxic people. And so, self awareness helps us understand number one, what makes us happy, who makes us happy, how to be happy. Those are key things to keep in mind. Next slide. So, what are some barriers to mindfulness? And you see this slide here, these skydivers. And the skydivers represent feeling of freedom, you know, being unencumbered. And what we want to do to increase our mindfulness or the things that affect our mindfulness is being under stress. How do you identify, am I stressed? Am I exhausted? Am I tired? Do I have energy? Do I not have energy? Am I hungry? Am I emotionally reactive? What's my pain level? Am I being rushed? Addicted or compulsive behavior, am I being absorbed in my own narrative? In other words, can I not get out of my own trauma or struggle? And sometimes homelessness. These are some basic things that affect our barriers to mindfulness. If you feel that, and I'm sure some of us or all of us can relate to any of these things on this, to some of these barriers. This is the first part of mindfulness, being aware. Again, back to self awareness. If I feel these things, okay, I feel this. Now, executive functioning is going to help me get out of this, getting out from being under stress. How do I function out of stress? Next slide. Okay, so What are some benefits of mindfulness? It can help relieve our stress because I'm aware. If I'm aware what's gotten me stressed or unhealthy, if I'm aware what it is, I have to react to it. Mindfulness relieves stress. It treats heart disease. It lowers our blood pressure. It reduces chronic pain. It improves our sleep and alleviates gastrointestinal difficulties. Improved sleep is critical because it affects mostly everything else. There is a phenomena or a process of the intersection between the mind, the body, and spirit. Those three elements of our being affects each other. A stressful mind impacts our body. Stress affects pressure. The pressure and the stress combined makes us doubt or sometimes question our level of spirituality and what we believe in. And so it's key and critical that we pay attention to that through our self-awareness. A lot of times we don't want to be self-aware because when we are self-aware, it can raise our anxiety. Mindfulness practices can help us increase our ability to regulate those emotions, decrease our stress, anxiety, and depression. It can also help us focus our attention as well as to observe our thoughts and feelings without judgment. Um, Avoiding things, knowing that you need to pay attention to something and avoiding it, it causes us to repress or push down that stress, which causes more problems physically for us. And we need to pay attention to that. Next slide. So, how do we get there? How do we make ourselves available to receive mindfulness practices to achieve a healthy mental state? Again, individual therapy to increase our awareness to the presenting issues. Therapy and counseling are two different things. Oftentimes, counseling and therapy are co used, but they're different processes. Counseling, someone works with you to give you ideas and suggestions. Therapy is an opportunity for you or we as people to understand our own internal process and come up with our own recourse or identification of the concerns and issues. And then we work on a solution ourselves to resolve the concern. Medication to manage chemical imbalances organically. When I spoke earlier, I talked about organic illnesses and inorganic illnesses. So, because we're disposed biologically or genetically to certain illnesses or depressions or anxieties or ADHD, sometimes medication might be a way to help balance that out as a prophylactic, not as a long term fix, but as something to help us through a tough period until we learn through mindfulness to better manage our stressors or anxieties. Another option is family therapy to address systemic dysfunction among participants or family members. Uh, we all have family members, and not every family member in our circle may be healthy. And so there are dynamics that impact us as well that affects our stress level, our ability to communicate effectively, etc. And again, of course, mindfulness practices. Next slide. So we talk about mindfulness and the power of understanding the mind, body, spirit philosophy. What goes on in the mind, again, affects our body. What goes on in our body affects our mind. And so taking care of our body really makes us feel good sometimes. Doing a good, thorough exercise, uh, doing some yoga, doing some things that make you feel good, or just being on a diet, losing a few pounds, it makes our mind feel better. uh, Resolving conflicts with colleagues or coworkers, resolving conflicts with our children makes our mind feel body. And then our belief in the higher spirit is improved also. And it's important to realize that the spiritual philosophy, spirit philosophy is not the same as religion. Our spirituality is our rootedness and being connected to another power or higher power or belief in other things that makes us feel good. Embracing positive psychology's principles that I just talked about, those 5 principles. Having those positive emotions, experiencing, cultivating positive emotions such as joy, gratitude, and love. Engagement in finding and pursuing activities that absorb and challenge one's skills and strengths, and building positive relationships. So, if you ever get a chance, research the history and information about positive psychology. Now, if we are ill at ease or not comfortable with our mental health at a given point in time, it makes it hard for us to feel good about embracing mindfulness. If you are a very, very depressed person or a stressed person or an anxious person or lack focus, it's hard to sit down and conceive of the idea of all this feel good talk and trying mindfulness. Mindfulness is a machine that gets us to where we need to be. Um, and so, again, the counseling is important. Whether it's counseling from the traditional therapy point, it could be pastoral counseling, it could be therapy with a therapist. Some type of way is important to get there. Now, it's important too. The most powerful thing are things that you can do for yourself as far as mindfulness. That could be uh, uh, um, guided imagery, relaxation techniques, just being still some time and reflecting on your day, thinking about the next day, are some basic techniques that can help you bring the anxiety down, bring the energy down, so that you can think about what makes you happy to get to the next day. Next slide. Um, okay, so there is the importance of understanding your strengths. Even when things feel bad, what what are your strengths? What are the things that you do well? What do you feel about? Even in the most dire situations, you have strengths and things that you do well. And it's important to promote your strengths and think about, okay, how do I take this to get to the next level? We incorporate and teach those techniques to help you feel better about getting to more of a healthier state of mind. Now, developing a commitment to avoid technology screens is key. Right now, we're seeing the impact of screens on children and adults as increasing isolation. It's a move away from more mindfulness to self. It is addictive that you avoid tasks that are healthy for your own evolution and commitment to yourself. Research is showing that screens affect rest and sleep. If you went through your job or socially enjoy screens and videos and social media, turn screens off an hour to a half hour before you lay down for bed. Because what happens is our mind is racing in the background with different stimulation and inputs that prevent us from getting to what's called REM sleep. REM sleep is key for us to get good rest and relaxation. I'm sure some of you may have experience where you say, well, I wake up in the morning, I'm tired. I'm still tired when I wake up. Well, you may not have gone to REM sleep. You're asleep for 8 hours or 7 hours, but you wake up tired. If you can't get into REM, you're not really resting. And so what prevents us from getting into REM is stress. Our mind still operate in the background, and that is a direct result of screens. Uh, so at night, when you're sleeping, no blue lights, no blue lights in your bedroom. That's key to mindfulness and being aware. We want to increase our physical awareness and activity. Some of us are Some of us are impacted due to physical impairment sometimes, but there's something we can do, always do, whether it's walking around the house, walking around the neighborhood, um, doing something physically, moving in some capacity is critical. And embrace healthier dieting. Now, we talk about embracing healthier dieting. That's a big step too, because some of us live in food deserts. And if you live in a food desert, getting more vegetables and fruits and healthier foods might be a challenge sometimes. And that raises our anxiety and stress level as well. So we want to make sure that we are aware of staying away from the things that don't work well with us physically, diet wise. Next screen. As I said before, being active in some ways, we could journal. Journaling requires us to slow down and write down what we're feeling, because you can go back and look at it and see what it is that's causing your discomfort, your emotional stress, and it gives you an opportunity to kind of think about, okay, what do I want moving forward? One of the things that we teach our students in graduate school at Howard University, we have what's called process recordings. And in those process recordings, the social worker has to think about what are they experiencing, even as a social worker, giving input and assistance to other people. What are you experiencing? Because we need to increase our awareness. We have to increase our awareness to what we're experiencing. Walking, you don't have to walk fast, you don't have to walk far, but you have to walk, and walking again is healthy and it gives you a chance to think. Biking, swimming. Swimming is the most comprehensive exercise because you work every muscle in the body when you swim. Not far, not fast, but just to do it. Brother sister circles to share and talk about feelings, relationships, just to share. Spirituality practices and real talk and authenticity. And authenticity, or better yet term, keeping it real, is important because being authentic helps us take ownership for how we feel. It helps us take ownership for what we want to say to other people, and we're not carrying other baggage around with us. Think about when you are unhappy with a family member or a friend or employer or a colleague or coworker, how you feel when you give them feedback about something that you have concerns about. It's not about them agreeing with you or liking what you said. It's about you not carrying it anymore. You don't take it with you, which is very, very important. Next slide. As I conclude this discussion about this component of this discussion, I just want to highlight mental health includes that mindfulness practice, as I said before. Um, the process of maintaining mental health is always ongoing. It's a static state at a given point in time. Our mental health will change from moment to moment. Um, that mindfulness is an ongoing thing, and we'll have a chance to dialogue over questions and so forth. But as you think about this process with mindfulness, it's key to think about what is the thing most important to you to help you get to your mental health status. Um, think about. I laughed at this last night with my wife. We were talking about the Powerball is up to what, $800 million or something crazy like that. Well, in that you think about, well, if you hit the number, what would you do with all that money? And even that comes with a certain level of anxiety and stress about how you even handle that. So money doesn't can give you mental health. Uh, the objects in our life don't give us mental health. It's the process of how we live that helps us have the mental health in our daily living. And as I said before, um, our physical health is consistent with the mental, spiritual, and physical health to the best degree possible. And sometimes our mental health could be the process of being fully mentally healthy. The, our mental health could be the idea that I'm always working on getting better. When I do therapy with individuals, um, there's always something going on to address. So people will say, well, wow, man, you spend a lot of money and time going to therapy. You must have a lot going on. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Mental health is a commitment to stay level. And healthy people oftentimes engage in therapy. And it was a time not too long ago that going to therapy, taking care of your mental health was seen as a deficit or a problem thing. But now, especially with the onset of COVID, our mental health or the process to maintain our mental health is gotten to be a very, very valuable process. We the engagement of therapy has increased by multitudes since COVID kicked off, and we're seeing the numbers hold still even to this day. Um, and again, as I said before, spirituality is not the same as being religious. But again, it's believing in that higher power, and we are singly responsible for our individual mental health versus waiting on someone to tell us how to feel. It's important for us to realize that. Um, Now, as we talk about this and mindfulness, um, I would encourage everybody to write down for yourself what are, and you can you can make bullets of this. What are the things that really bring me down? What are they? So we're going to ask ourselves, okay, what brings us down? And do you have a plan? What would be your plan to overcome those things that bring us down? And in that plan, in that plan of what would bring us down and how we address those things, what would be your plan daily? What's your daily plan to address that? And oftentimes we have these thoughts and we don't, the thought stays there, but we don't develop that plan to address it. Oftentimes we'll say things like, I'm gonna pray on it. Prayer is important, but that does not get you into a mindfulness practice to address it. We have that responsibility to grab that and address it head on, and that's the difference. Okay, um, so we want to identify the things. How do we want to get around those things and develop a plan to do that? That's mindfulness. The mindfulness is the engine that gets us there. Okay, um, and each of you or any of us can have a different approach of what mindfulness practices works for us. Um, And sometimes, as you engage in mindfulness practice, you may experience some anxiety. It may cause some stress. Embrace that feeling. Embrace that feeling because that feeling of the stress or the anxiety has to be addressed so you can keep moving to get the mental health to where you want to be. Okay. Um, let me stop here and see other questions right now.
Hello. Yeah. So there haven't been any questions from the viewers to this point, but I had a couple of questions.
Sure.
Um, One of the things that when you're doing your presentation, the word that came to my mind a lot was intentional. And so, how is that work? I've been hearing that a lot when we're talking about activities and how we approach things, how we approach our lives as being intentional. So, how is being intentional related to mindfulness? Is it related to mindfulness, or is that something that's separate?
No, it's related. Being intentional is related to mindfulness because we have to make that commitment to work towards that stable peace mindset of peacefulness and what we call health. We have to be intentional about it. It doesn't happen on its own. I think as we've evolved as people, we've evolved as individuals, we kind of think that things will unfold, as I said before, we'll pray about it, or
Mhm.
we'll surround ourselves with people who will help us get there. But we have to take that ownership of being intentional to get to where we need to be. Just like we are intentional when we try to lose weight, we're intentional about that. The same thing happens for our mental health. We have to be intentional.
Now, there might be some folks because as people of color, we tend to be a little bit more religious than other groups. So we say, well, prayer is an action, and so therefore that they could consider that being mindful. Can you help people understand? While prayer is still an action, you're actually getting in on your knees or whatever, however you pray is an action, why there is more action that needs to happen with the prayer in order to achieve a level of
Right.
mindfulness.
So that's a great question. As I said before, prayer or spirituality is part of that mind, body, spirit experience.
Mhm.
And the prayer, the praying helps us get closer and connected to that spiritual energy.
Right.
And sometimes they will say this. I'll use the term not to be religious, but I'll use the term God, for example. God or whoever your deity may be, you're asking for protection, or you're asking for an answer, or you're asking for guidance. Okay, that guidance and that protection will be there, but we still have to act on it. We
Right.
still have to act on it and trust, have faith in our decision to move, or to buy, or to sell, or to engage something. We're asking for faith, we're asking for protection, but we have still have to act on it. If that
Right.
makes if that makes
No, it
sense.
makes sense because I'm thinking about it in Christian faith. I'm not speaking for everybody. In Christian faith,
Sure,
there's
sure,
there's a common passage that says faith without work is dead, right? And so we say,
exactly.
so that seems like that's the example of, yes, you have faith, yes, you ask for spiritual guidance, but you have to put in the work. So let's say, for example, you've got diabetes, right? You get recently diagnosed with diabetes, and you say, God, help me find the spirit to defeat this condition. Well, if you're still eating the same things, you're not exercising, you're not doing what you need to do, the prayer is helping, because
Right.
but your body is still going to deteriorate because you're not doing the work, which is changing your diet, exercising more. And if you're on medication, taking your medication and following up with your primary care physician, that's the work. The faith is, I'm going to get through this.
Exactly.
The
Exactly.
work is doing the work to get through this.
Exactly. Give me the cover to get through it. Give me the cover to get through it. Give me the strength to get through it. I'm going to trust in my decision making with your guidance to get through it. But
Right.
we get the work, faith it out, faith and work together.
Exactly. So
Exactly.
I think you did a great job of really helping distinguish between mental health and mindset, and breaking down mental health as organic and inorganic, right? There are some things that are within us. If we have a family history of depression or some other, schizophrenia is shown to be hereditary. There's some other illnesses. There's some things that are organic that we don't have much control over. Um, and then there's those inorganic things, right? And so I help me if I'm phrasing this right. Mindfulness really helps us control or have some sense of control over the inorganic stressors that could impact our mental health. Am I
Well,
saying that correctly?
yes and no. So the mindfulness is more effective with the inorganic stuff, but it's also effective with the organic stuff, right?
Okay.
It's very impactful with both of those, right? We just have to be aware of what we're dealing with when we're talking about being mindful. So
Okay.
if I know I have a family history, a significant family history of depression,
Mhm.
and it's impacting me significantly, I have to really do some things mindfulness wise to really work to maintain a stable existence, right? I have to my medication, I have to do my therapy, I have to do some relaxation, I have to eat healthier, I have to surround myself with positive people. I have to avoid certain stressors. These are things I'm doing mindfulness wise to have that equilibrium of healthiness.
Right.
Of and my level of healthiness is going to vary from your level of healthiness.
Right.
So how we see what that marker is. Now sometimes my mental health may not match up what others want for my mental health to be. Like it might not match up with my parents' example of mental health for me, right? So mental health is our own static state of being in a moment in time across a continuum, if that makes sense.
Oh, it makes sense. I think the other word, phrase that you mentioned throughout your presentation, which was fantastic, by the way,
Thank you.
um, was self-awareness, right? And you hear that, and then I see what's going on in society, and this is just my interpretation, is that people are tending to run away from that self-awareness because self-awareness can be distressful, right? It can
Yeah,
cause some cognitive dissonance um, in that person. So, like, for example, if we're talking about historical facts and race relations, we're saying, okay, here's what's happened, and we can't whitewash this, no pun intended. What
sure.
happened, but even that may cause a certain group of people some distress. It's caused a group that was impacted distress, and it's caused the people
Sure.
that are part of the group that enacted it distress. So both groups are distressed in a way, but if we run away from it, we don't have that awareness that says, I am stressed by this. And then awareness says, how do I deal with the stress? And what
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's what's driving some of the actions. Some people are choosing to run away from it. Some people are choosing to lean into it.
Right.
So help us understand really how it seems like self-awareness is
Yeah.
that
That's
piece between mindfulness.
that's so you hit the nail on the head. That's a perfect segue. So, for example, I found myself not sleeping well for over a period, say a couple years ago, and I said, well, "Why am I not sleeping well? What's causing my stress? What's causing my imbalance?" And I realized I was watching too much of the news. I was
Mm,
watching too much of the news, too
right,
much CNN, too much MSNBC, too much Fox, too much of it.
right.
And what I was doing was I was not at peace with all the drama with the news. I said, you know what, let me get away from that. Let me get away from that.
Hmm.
And once I got away from it, it's like, oh, okay, okay. Identify the things that you can control,
Right.
identify the things that are healthier for you, identify the things that make you disengage, right? They have that quiet impact on our behavior. And so, just as simple as that, or being around toxic people.
Yeah.
There are people that we love and care for, but you know what? It's a little toxic for me. I love them, but it's
Right.
not really toxic. They're toxic. So let's say you have a group of friends, and Bobby and Timmy don't get along really well, and when they don't get along well together, it stresses me out.
Hmm.
Well, maybe I need to separate. Maybe I need to spend time with them separately and not together, because
Right.
I value them together. I value them, but they don't coexist. So because of that dynamic, I need to do something different so that I'm not stressed out by their behavior. That kind of thing.
So that would be a word that's common on trigger, right? So we have different triggers, and then that self-awareness piece because there were certain um, we could talk about certain family members, and we say, okay, whenever you're around this person, you feel your anxiety level go up, your heart rate goes up, you start becoming a little bit more anxious. You've got to be aware of that, right? That's where the
Yeah,
self-awareness
yeah,
is,
yeah,
and then be mindful of those interactions, or even not avoiding the interactions, but being mindful of how those interactions go, so you don't overly stress yourself or trigger
yeah,
that
yeah.
emotional response.
Yeah, a good example of that. There's a term called ACOA. ACOA stands for Adult Child of Alcoholic, for example. This is an
Mhm.
example. If you have the experience of being raised as a child in an alcoholic home, there are certain characteristics and traits you have as an adult that you've learned to coexist with the alcoholic parent. You develop these traits and characteristics, and when you are around people that trigger those emotions for you as an adult, those behaviors come out again. So those are things that are important to be aware of where you've come from too, being aware of your history and evolution as a person.
Right,
Yeah,
right. Oh yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
that is great. So I think and my final question for you, thank you for hanging around and answering these questions.
No, no, no. My pleasure.
But my final question is, I'm seeing the term mindfulness be used a lot in the media. It's being co-opted in corporate America in terms of their employees. You got to be mindful, and while you're working and all this other stuff. And so, how is mindfulness something that is for mass consumption, or is that an individual, how you have to understand who you are and how you can better interact with your environment, what be it individuals, be it group, be it work, whatever. It's
Yeah.
really about taking an assessment of who you are, finding out what those triggers are, and then finding the best way to engage in your environment.
Yeah, in the commercial sense, mindfulness is a trade term, if you will. So, being mindful, be mindful about what you're doing. Be mindful. In other words, be considerate. Be conscious of what
Right,
you're doing.
right,
Conscious of what you're doing. That's the commercial phase of it. Being mindful on an individual level is understanding the steps that you need to engage in, or a system or a process you have to get to where you want to be health wise.
right.
Okay, it's a process. It's a process of different techniques and approaches you engage in to get to where you want to be mentally, right? Being utilizing mindfulness practices, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. So like your mindful practice was turning off the news, right? So that was part of your saying, okay, I'm out of balance, uh,
Yeah.
and I'm not sleeping well because of this imbalance. Here's
Hmm.
something I did, action, faith without
Hmm.
work,
Right.
action.
Right.
I'm going to turn
Right.
off and stop watching the news so much. Other things people can do, and you listed it well in the presentations, taking a walk, uh, meditation activities, and there's all types of meditation activities. Uh, Deep breathing, that's part of that meditation. Yoga is another activity that people can engage in. Some people art practices, where that's
Sure.
drawing, singing, painting, sculpting, whatever. There's a lot of things that can really calm the mind and the spirit and get you back to center, where you can have that centering activities of self-awareness that you were mentioning in your presentation.
Yeah. Yeah. Years ago, prior to the advent of managed care, prior to managed care, if mental health treatment included art therapy,
Hmm.
music therapy, physical therapy, dance therapy. They were part of the traditional treatment for certain mental illnesses. With the advent of managed care, those things got removed. Insurances will not pay for those things anymore. And so now you have to go outside on your own and say, oh, well, what are some mindfulness things I can engage in to help me manage my depression and my mood? And those things that were comprehensive and holistic are not part of the mainstream treatment models anymore.
Right,
The more mainstream is psychiatric care with medication, or individual therapy, or individual counseling. The more creative things have been removed. And now we're seeing an increase in non-traditional forms of therapy in terms of psilocybin and psychoactive drug treatments and stuff now that's being researched and developed now even more under
mhm,
the more natural holistic realm of treatment.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think the bottom line, what are your three top key takeaways from folks with regards, if they're trying to engage, be more mindful in their lives? What are three kind of top tips that you would give to them?
Okay, first is you develop some quiet downtime just to get connected to how you feel. That's number one. The next thing is connect with positive energy, positive people around you, positive people. And the third thing is develop develop 3 goals a day for yourself to
Mhm,
maintain your health, to maintain your peace of mind. 3 goals a day. Whether it's okay, I'm going to take a walk, I'm going to address a concern with a colleague or peer.
mhm.
I'm going to uh, 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 have a purpose. My purpose for today is going to be such and such.
Right,
Okay, so develop 3 tasks a day for yourself to make you feel purposeful, to make you feel like you've accomplished something for yourself. Do something to take care of yourself daily.
right.
Those would be 3 things I would say.
Because as they say, you cannot pour from an empty cup, right? And
That's
so
right. That's right.
if you continue to set yourself to the side, it's eventually going to catch up to you, and it catches up to you in a myriad of ways, whether it's a mental, or sometimes it can be a what they call a psychosomatic, which is basically your psycho turning into a physical, because the cortisol level goes up, and that
Exactly.
inflammation in the body. We have there's been some links between mental health and diabetes and hypertension specifically, and we know how those two conditions are really disproportionately impacting communities of color, and so we really have to be mindful,
Yeah.
pun
Yeah.
intended, about
Yeah,
that.
and we said even with kids now in school, kids go to school and the teachers call the parents because the child is sleeping in class and the child's not doing the work. Well, what environment is the kid coming from?
Right.
How do we create a healthy environment? And sometimes we find out the parent may be doing some things unconsciously in the background that's allowing the child to get the rest they need.
Mhm.
So how does our environment be comprehensively holistic to have a healthy environment, even for your children? So the things that you do impact your children in the household. When the kids don't do right, do well, then you become stressed out, and then you become upset. So think about that holistic system of how we impact our environment as people to get the results we want.
Oh yeah, I remember when I was working in the public school system, and I was administrator, and the teachers would be complaining about the kids. It was an inner city school here in Atlanta, and the teachers would be complaining about the kids not bringing their books, and I'm looking at the books. I'm like, there's these big biology books and all these heavy books, and a lot of kids are walking to school or they're busing. And so I said, well, and they would just punish them for not bringing their
Sure,
books in. And I said,
sure.
well, are you asking the questions? What do you mean? Well, do you know his home situation?
Right.
His or her home situation? Because I'm talking to him and I'm noticing and I'm hearing that they're nomadic
Okay.
throughout the weekend. Sometimes at grandma's house, sometimes it's auntie house, sometimes at this house, whatever. So when you're that way, dragging a 6-pound biology book is not as important as making sure I've got clothes and my shoes and
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
so I might end up when I'm doing my roulette, whatever house I'm going to stay in that night, I'm going to end up at the house where the book was.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
And so
Right. Right.
it's a
Right.
simple thing where I'm like, what we need to do is maybe have, not to provide a crutch, but maybe have one or two copies of the book in the classroom. So therefore they don't get so far behind, and just have some conversations about what is going on
That's right.
with them, because that helps you not get so stressed out about what's happening in there. And then we can put in things in place that can help them in the lifestyle that they're having, but just constantly punishing them is not doing any good for them or for you.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And so we have to understand that because the hardest thing is taking a critical inventory of what goes on around us. So it requires a commitment. Can we make a commitment to evaluate ourselves and hear it and make some change?
Right.
Yeah.
So follow Miss Pitts. Okay, Miss Pitts, three advice: find some space for yourself, right?
Right.
Connect and have a purpose. Three things you want to accomplish each day
Each
for
day.
each day. So
Each
those
day.
will help you
Right.
get closer to that being mindful, and then you'll become part of your daily practices, and you'll see that your overall engagement with other people in life will improve significantly if you just take those three
Those
steps.
three steps. Right. And if one day you feel out of order, if you feel out of order one day, that's okay. That's
Hmm.
okay. That's okay. We're still striving for that daily peace, that daily sense of balance.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a great point, because too
Yeah.
many people, when they don't have a reset confidence, they say, "All right, forget the goal, right?
Yeah,
Forget it."
that's right. Right. I'm going back to the old thing. I'm going back to the old thing.
New Year's resolutions come to mind, and like automatically they're done. But I think I brought a statistic that said 80% of people have just abandoned their New Year's resolution by the end of January.
So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. So here's the fourth part. Do not make New Year's resolutions. Don't make them.
I
Don't make
don't.
New Year's
I really
resolutions.
don't. I really don't. And I stopped doing it, because I used to, and
Yeah.
I would get to first quarter, and it's like it's done. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
because we set the goals too far, too lofty, right? It's about improvement every day, and if yesterday wasn't everything that you wanted it to be, do that today, right? Don't
Yeah.
worry about what happened, because you can't fix yesterday. You could
Right.
only be in the moment. and worry about today, because tomorrow is going to be impacted by how you do today, right? And
That's so critical, right? Because our goals get to be too big sometimes. So have
Mhm.
small, achievable, realistic goals, and if you keep doing those, the big goal will come.
Yep,
The big goal will come,
yep,
right?
man.
Manageable, small, manageable goals.
That's fantastic. So thank you all for joining us. I appreciate all the folks that I see checking in. We got somebody checking in from London, England.
Wow, great.
By the way, so we got people across the pond that
Okay.
are watching this program. So I want to thank you all. I want to thank our partners at the Howard University School of Social Work for this whole program. This is part of the Struggle is Real series that we're doing here on blackdoctor.org. You can find them on the fourth Tuesday of every month at noon. And we
Okay.
have wonderful presentations. We've had things about sexual health. We've had things about pet therapy. We've had everything. We just had a great one on mindfulness. So I encourage you to go back and watch the entire series. Here, if you do have any questions, please put those in the comments, and we do follow up, and we'll send them to Mr. Fitz, and we will reply to you if you have any additional comments. Also, like to thank our partners at SAMHSA for being a sponsor of this program. So again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see y'all next month.
Thank you. Have a great day.